Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of Energy, Society, and the Middle East. We are at the tail end of week 3, concluding week 3 before getting into our final week, week 4, and we are discussing principally Sadia Zahidi's, 50 Million Rising. At this point, you really should have the book read, or later today. I would like to sort of go over a little bit some of your comments, and of course, go over the book insofar as it has contributed to the course and your thoughts and helped your evolution to think about energy and society in the Middle East, in the region. So let me get right to it. I asked you guys earlier this week to connect Michael Ross's The Oil Curse and his discussion of how oil typically, limits the sort of employment of women, especially in certain sectors, in these oil-rich economies. And I asked you to connect that to Zahidi's text, and many of you did do that. And as you can tell, the connections are many, and some of you, I believe, Jacqueline, it was you, did correctly point out that Zahidi does fundamentally disagree with the idea that oil in and of itself is the reason that women in the MENA region have not sort of enjoyed the same employment as other regions, right? And this goes to the video that y'all watched, maybe a couple weeks ago about about the oil curse. Is the oil the curse, or is the society the curse, or is it actually a blessing in disguise, right? Things of that nature. What Zahidi seems to support is that it is the people on the ground rather than the oil underneath the ground that is the problem, right? So, and that's a debate, and we've seen that now manifest itself in text and in video a couple of times. So thank you guys, good for making that connection. What we understand is, and what Zahidi and what Ross are trying to get to is, what is the lowest common denominator? What are some of the what are the main contributors to the economic problems in the region? Is it why are there so many wars? Why are women sort of kept behind in these weird ways? Is it because of religion or culture or oil or men or women or politics, right? And obviously it's a complex web of all these things. But we're seeing that different weight is given depending on which social scientists we read, whether it's oil or maybe it's culture. A couple more details. So as I'm speaking now, it would help maybe if you have the book to open up to the contents, or if you have the file, the PDF, to look at the table of contents, page V, and looking at the introduction and chapters 1 through 7, and then the conclusion. Of course, Zahidi has named her chapters these sort of very attractive, marketable names like Khadija's Daughters, right? Education Pioneers, Workforce Trailblazers. And what I want to do right now is to a little bit break them up into, what is she talking about in each chapter? What's her focus? Because the book, and it's a terrific book, is told as a series of stories, it's sometimes hard to tell where one idea sort of is compartmentalized, where one begins and the other one sort of ends, where one idea begins and ends and where the other one begins. So let me try and map that a little bit for you. So in her introduction, she's really looking at, and she's used Khadija, right? This hero from Islamic tradition. She's interested in really posing the idea that, Islam has women heroes. Islam as the tradition, the history, going back centuries. And she's using that as her foundation. She goes, okay, well, we're talking about 50 million Muslims entering the economy, Muslim women. And they're building on they're not starting from scratch, they're starting on a foundation, on tradition that believes in strong women. And that being Khadija, who is Muhammad's first wife. And she married him, not he married her. And in order to know more about that, maybe take a different class with me, okay? We'll leave that as a cliffhanger. The next chapter, of course, does focus squarely on education. And you'll notice, of course, if you look at the World Bank, if you look at the various sort of UN-related offices, and in our readings as well, education really is the cornerstone of empowering a human being in the modern world. Of course, that includes women and empowering women in entering the workforce. So that chapter really does look squarely at education. The next chapter on workforce trailblazers, it's a there are a host of examples of these Muslim women who either have, with their education and with their grit, are using their computer engineering or their education in medicine, or creating, ride sharing apps, various things that actually do pay very well. Okay, so it's not just a story of women working or even women making money. It's like women on their own terms hacking out of the forest, carving out of society itself their place, and then making money. So it's really a show of power. Moving along over here, when she talks about uncharted waters, that chapter really does look at problems. What are some of the problems that working women face in Muslim majority countries, right? And we've talked about a number of them on the discussion forum. They include kind of social pressure and male sort of patriarchal expectations, right? So that's a major issue. And you have that not only in Muslim majority countries, you have a lot of that, for example, in India, which is a majority non-Muslim country, and China and other sort of more traditional societies. So that's, she does map out some of those problems there. The next chapter, of course, digital opportunity, looking at the digital economy. That's something for especially y'all as young people. As millennials, who play a really, really heavy role in the book, the digital economy is the economy. Just like myself as a scholar, digital humanities is humanities. Digital, banking is banking. Everything is done online. So it's revolutionized the world, and therefore it's revolutionized Muslim women working in their respective economies as well. You cannot, of course, have a book like this without talking about the new marriage market, okay? So marriage, therefore divorce, therefore children, pregnancy, abortion, all these things play a very, very important role. Women are not just half of the working population, they are the givers of life, right? Whether you like it or not. So to speak about women entering the economy, being entrepreneurs, is also to speak about maternity leave. Is to speak about hiring practices, sexual discrimination, sexual harassment, these things that in our society here in the U.S. are so important, and these laws are constantly violated, and they're sort of reinforced, and then we get training, and it's a cycle that is important here as much as it is over there. So we have a lot of things obviously that we share in common. A couple of other things, of course, the section, chapter 6 here on business at the front lines. So what's the good thing? The good thing is business. That's the force of good in the world. So what are some of the regressive bad forces, right? Again, it's kind of a mix of this outdated culture / religion and patriarchy, right? Women going out and dressing a certain way and working and making money does sort of shake up the status quo. What if you're a man and you lost your job and now you have no self-esteem? Well, how can you stay married to this woman, right? What are you going to do? Are you going to accept a lower paying job? Are you going to accept being a stay-at-home dad? Are you guys going to get a divorce, right? These are all real issues. We might poke the finger or we might pass judgment, but these are real issues. They're real issues, again, here in our comfortable seats in the U.S., but they're also real issues there as well. So some of those issues, of course, come about. In business, really, Zahedi is a big sort of, kind of moderate capitalism, sort of business is the solution to everything. So that's her sort of thesis. Of course, we also can't talk about this, the subject of Muslim women entering the economy without talking about Islam. So our section here about ministers and mullahs, I love the title of that chapter, right? Ministers are political, mullahs are religious, and in this region, the two mix all the time. So what does she say here? Really, this is a big question for you all. This is a question for you all. What impact does Islam as a religion have? One way or another. How does working women impact Islam, and how does Islam impact working women in the MENA region? And it's important, it's outsized, it's oversized. It's important because of the media, because of our imagination, because of politics. I've already told you, and we've already seen multiple times here, that within Islam itself, you have women heroes. You have debates between men and women. We have in many Muslim majority states, Pakistan, Bangladesh, elsewhere, you have women leaders. We've never had that in the U.S., right? So is Islam good or bad for women working in public? Attached to that is this question, which has oftentimes been associated with Islam. But again, I would say it's not fundamentally Islamic. It's become part of the religion, right? But what about morality and dignity and protection of women, right? This is very, very common in traditional societies. It's used as a sort of badge of honor. We protect our women, or we are dignified, or our family is honorable. What does this mean, right? And how has this kept women behind artificially? And what connection does it have to culture or religion, right? How can we ascribe blame to the factors that have kept women behind? Do we blame Islam? Do we blame culture? Do we blame patriarchy? I want you guys to be very, very sensitive and to be nuanced when you write and when you speak about these things. The answer is never going to be simple. It's just this, right? That's what the media does all the time, and it has contributed directly to, in my opinion, hate speech, and if you go to other places, even just physical violence and conflicts. We want to be very, very nuanced and careful. And I think that, of course, ministers and mullahs, religion and politics, have played a very negative role historically. Some of them, of course, or some forces, I would say, of religion and politics have played a very positive role. So anyway, I won't belabor the point. A couple of final remarks on her book, of course. And I will turn here to what's next. There's a page which caught my attention, and I will read to you now. Page 236. Capitalism, globalization, and technology have had harsh impacts on the working class in the United States, in the United Kingdom, and elsewhere in the West in recent years. On the other side of the world, these same forces have empowered millions of women, with far-reaching consequences for their families, communities, and countries. The American dream is alive and well among working women of the Muslim world. A striking quote, almost at the conclusion of her book. What does she mean by that? There's an American dream that lives outside of America, and it lives among, of all populations, Muslim women, which within America we see through the lens of our media as oppressed and somehow backwards and etc. This tells us a very different story. This tells us that Muslim women are rising, that they're educated, that they're sophisticated, and that they might even have a couple of advantages that women here in the U.S. don't have. What do you guys think about that? You tell me what you think. Speak from the evidence. Speak using page numbers. And I'm sure we'll come to sort of healthy conclusions individually. A couple of other sort of themes that were existing or that existed in the book throughout, of course, are the hijab. The hijab, of course, the clothing being a sort of focal point everywhere you go. Whether a woman is working or business is good or culture is bad or men are in the picture somehow. Women's clothing and the hijab is always front and center. Again, for all sorts of reasons. Another thing, of course, is I found two countries. She spoke about all sorts of countries. She spoke about Saudi Arabia, Pakistan at length. I found two countries very interesting. One was Indonesia. The other one was Kazakhstan. Okay, we don't hear about them as much as Saudi Arabia or maybe even Afghanistan because of our own politics here in the US. Indonesia is an incredibly conservative country culturally, but it's at the cutting edge of employing women. What's going on here? Right? And then you have another country like Kazakhstan, which is probably the most liberal Muslim country, and they're also at the cutting edge of employing women. So that tells me, if I want to be empirical, scientific, and careful, that religion in and of itself is not the most important factor. We have to look at other things. And that maybe religion, of course, is tied to culture, language, etc., things like that. A couple of other things. Entrepreneurship, I mentioned that to you. Entrepreneurship is so important. Entrepreneurship is really important, not because of the LinkedIn sort of credentials that it gives you. I'm an entrepreneur, right? When I get a card from someone that says entrepreneur, I'm like, what do you do? That's not what I'm talking about here. Entrepreneurship means here, you didn't give me a chance, so I made my own chance. You took me out of the team. You cut me from the team, so I made my own team. That's what that tells me over here. So those are some very, very important themes that pervade the book. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed reading your discussion questions. We'll be moving next week, of course, to looking at how do we make energy better? How do we make it more secure? How do we spend the money we make off energy more responsibly? And how do we make the entire process more sustainable? Again, the first 2 weeks we're looking at problems. The second 2 weeks, we're now in the third, so we're in that beginning of the second 2 weeks. We're looking at solutions. So keep it coming, guys. I look forward to reading your papers, and have a good weekend.